and clicking the button that allows the public to come in. So get ready to close.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Again, today is Thursday, July 13th, and the board has been in executive session this morning to discuss legal questions and potential litigation surrounding the termination of Peak Microgreens lease in Eagle County. The discussion was limited to privileged attorney-client communication, and no decisions were reached in executive session. The board is now back on the record and preparing to proceed with its regular open agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, this is the July 13th, 2023 meeting of the State Board of Land Commissioners. We have 4 of our commissioners present. Commissioner Chavez is doing other important work today, so we are unable to have him join us. But I want to first acknowledge a thank you to the staff. We had a terrific workshop yesterday in Weld County where we spent a lot of time learning about oil and gas, which is a really important line of business that we are in, and did some site visits and had some great speakers. So just want to appreciate the time and effort it always takes to put those together for us.
I hope Katie and Crystal are listening, and Steve, but thank you all.
Absolutely.
It was a great day. All right.
I like most about the land board is we're a learning organization, so I really appreciate it being able to do that with staff and taking the time to do so. With that, I'll open it, Nick, to any public comment that is not one of related to one of our agenda items.
Yep, folks, if you're listening online and you're here to make a comment to the board on non-agenda items for the day, please use the raise hand feature and we'll give you the ability to speak to the board. We do have one hand raised from, I'm going to pronounce it, Lovall, Mr. Mark Lovall. So give me a moment.
So,
Mark, you're in charge of your mic and camera on your end.
Very good. Thank you. Anyway, no comment other than I just wanted to introduce myself to the board, or reintroduce myself to some of you that I may have met last year when you were down in Durango. My name is Mark Lovall, and I'm the State Lands Program Specialist for Colorado State Forest Service. And so this is my first meeting that I've been able to attend, so I'm just going to kind of listen and find out what's going on, and hopefully, you know, if you have some questions, obviously feel free to ask me, and maybe I can do some put together kind of a little presentation for you guys later on in the year about what we're doing at the Colorado State Forest Service. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you joining us this morning.
Mark, I'm going to flip your status back to attendee, so you'll drop off the screen, but you should be able to listen after a reconnect.
Okay, great. No problem. Thank you.
Perfect. We did not receive any online comments that I am aware of related to the agenda or not, so we'll just continue to move forward. Director Ryan, announcements?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing's not covered. Nothing that's not covered in the statute.
Very good. All right, moving on. DNR report. We have Vanessa with us. Oh, we have another DNR. Welcome.
Thank you.
And it was, I will just know, it was nice to have Vanessa Mazel with us for our workshop yesterday, and we are sad to see her leave. She's been just terrific work for it and board.
Great. Thank you, Director Ryan. Fair Scanlon Commissioners. My name is Aaron Ray, Assistant Director for Energy Innovation in the Executive Director's Office at DNR. here on behalf of Executive Director Gibbs to present an update on DNR activities. First, Chair, as you mentioned, we're sad to announce that Policy Advisor Vanessa Mazel will be leaving DNR at the end of the month to pursue new adventures. The department appreciates her important contributions and her support of the state. So it's a big loss. And we will miss her. Other personnel activities, we have hired a new tribal liaison, Stacy Coleman. She started last week in the Executive Director's office. We're happy to have Stacy on board to assist with all of their tribal engagement. Our Assistant Director for Lands and Wildlife position should be announced. The appointment there should be announced soon, so that's coming.
And Aaron, just so you know, we're meeting with Stacy Coleman tomorrow.
Terrific.
So we have opportunities to work with the tribes down in Southwest Colorado, and she'll be a wonderful resource for us to keep those relations in a good place.
That's a really important role. Stacy. Executive Director Gibbs attended the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting this week in Albuquerque. And he is on his way to Eastern Colorado to meet with tribes related to Fisher's Peak State Park. I wanted to note some follow-up in 2023 legislative session, which, as you all know, was an active one. The Executive Director's Office, DNR, has some new task force and advisory responsibilities coming out of legislation from that session. Those include the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, which I'll talk more about in a moment, the Colorado River Drought Task Force, the Wild Horse Working Group, the Working Advisory Group on Biochar in Oil and Gas Well Plugging, mouthful there, and the Task Force on the Rights of Coloradans with Disabilities. So those are all new groups that DNR will be engaging with. There are a number of interim legislative committees that will be meeting this summer. Those appointments have been announced and meetings are starting soon. DNR expects to participate in a number of those, especially the Ozone Air Quality Interim Committee, the Water Resources and Agriculture Committee, which is now a year-round committee based on Senate Bill 23010, and the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. So all.
Do you know if there is, for a long time, there was an interim school finance committee? And I thought it had expired a year ago, and I would love to know if it's been reconstituted or, continues to exist in some way, shape, or form.
I don't know, but I will find out.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. As we're coming out of the last legislative session, we're already starting to look forward to the next legislative session, and the governor's office and state agencies are in the process of developing the legislative agenda for the upcoming 2024 legislative session. In addition to active legislative activity, it was a very successful budget year for DNR in 2023-2024. We had appropriation of new funding to support the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Committee, now ECMC, which I'll talk about, to support their ongoing mission change, new funding to support the rollout of the Keep Colorado Wild Pass, funding to support winter recreation and athletic safety, and resources to continue to manage our growing portfolio of state parks. So very successful budget year for DNR. And as we are developing the wedge agenda, we're also in the process of developing the budget proposals for the next fiscal year. In the water world, Becky Mitchell has officially transitioned to her full-time role as the Colorado River Commissioner, and the search for a new CWCP executive director will be getting underway soon. So one change there. I'll also note that you may be aware that 100% of the state has officially been released from drought status based on good precipitation in the last year. Although I will note that that designation could change for parts of the state given potential dry conditions coming. So as always, keep your eye on the forecast. In the forest health realm, one thing that we were remiss in not updating you about in June is that Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, and other state agencies released a natural working land strategic plan for climate smart forests, farms, and lands in June. That's part of the state's greenhouse gas reduction roadmap. That strategic plan emphasizes strategies to reduce carbon emissions from natural working lands activities, as well as to promote biologic carbon sequestration on natural working lands. So those include strategies related to natural infrastructure, wetland protection and mitigation, and other activities related to natural wetlands. So we're excited about that plan. There's lots of good work laid out in it, and now we turn to implementing those strategies. In the Colorado Strategic Wildlife Action Plan arena, DNR received an OSPB grant for $360,000 to support a 3-year monitoring effort associated with CoSwap's Landscape Resilient Investment Program. We're partnering with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute on that 3-year grant. So gathering more information about the progress that those investments will make. We're also undertaking an organizational assessment of our wildfire mitigation programs. That includes DNR, Colorado State Forest Service, and the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, which is within Department of Public Safety. That organizational assessment is scheduled to be completed in September of 2023. And finally, CoSwap has announced that they've encumbered all of the original SB 21-258 funding, that's $17.5 million as of the end of the last fiscal year. So putting that money to good use. The final area I want to touch on in this realm is that the state is updating our greenhouse gas emissions reduction roadmap, which was published in 2021, the first version of that roadmap. We're undertaking a process to update that roadmap to identify new actions the state could take to meet our emissions reductions goals. We held a series of public meetings over the last month all around the state to gather public feedback on what should be included in that roadmap. The end of this month and into August, we'll be holding sector-specific roundtables with interested stakeholders and affected sectors to gather more feedback on what should be included in that roadmap. This is all sort of the beginning of the process. We'll take all that feedback. It'll be considered, and later this year, we'll go back to the public following up on here's what you told us, and now here's what we propose to be included in the room. So lots of important work happening there. Also on the energy front, as I noted earlier, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is now officially the Energy and Carbon Management Commission as of July 1st. That was directed by Senate Bill 23-285. The sort of reason for rebranding OGCC and this sort of new mission change is to accommodate a broader mission. So the commission will now be responsible for implementing new rules and policies associated with deep geothermal projects, geologic carbon sequestration projects, and underground natural gas storage. So the commission will continue to regulate oil and gas as they have, and now be responsible for these new emerging energy technologies. ECMC is also working with the Department of Public Health and Environment to implement the governor's directives from a March 16th letter around ozone precursor emissions reductions. So that work will be rolling out in terms of regulatory action over the next few months. Finally, related to oil and gas development, the department is standing up the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, which is a member organization dedicated to making recommendations to reduce freshwater use in oil and gas operations. Executive Director Gibbs nominated 3 members of a governing body that represent ECMC, the Department of Public Health and Environment, and the Division of Water Resources. That governing body then made additional appointments to membership of that consortium, as did legislative leadership. So we now have a consortium. The next step is to outline a series of meetings and begin to implement charge of that consortium. Turning to federal policy and planning, there's a lot happening this summer in that realm. DNR submitted comments on the BLM's draft land use planning revisions, which include proposals to regulate leases on federal lands for conservation and mitigation. That's a rule that is being considered now. We're also reviewing a number of additional BLM rules, 2 related to renewable energy development. BLM has provided to cooperating agencies, Colorado is one, the preliminary work on the programmatic solar environmental impact statement. This is intended to identify BLM lands for leasing of utility scale solar. We are reviewing those materials and commenting. BLM has also proposed a final, what they're calling renewable energy rule, which reduces rates on renewable energy projects on federal lands. The state will provide comments on that rule, and public comments are accepted through August 15th. So from BLM's perspective, two complementary rules intended to facilitate renewable energy development on federal lands. We're also reviewing BLM's final resource management plan covering the Eastern Plains and the San Luis Valley and the Front Range. That rule has been in development since 2015, so a long process there. We're reviewing preliminary draft RMPs for Gunnison sage grouse and big game, and preliminary components of a draft analysis for the greater sage grouse land use planning process. So a lot happening on federal rules. A couple more notes, and then we'd be happy to take any questions that you have. In the federal legislative arena, on Tuesday, Senator Hickenlooper introduced the reauthorization legislation for the Upper Colorado and San Juan endangered fish recovery programs. Senator Bennett introduced two Colorado public lands bills that received Senate committee hearings on Wednesday. One is the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act, which would include permanent protection for Camp Hale and other management designations, and the Dolores River National Conservation Area Act, which would provide statutory designation for the Dolores River Canyon in southwest Colorado. And finally, other members of the Colorado delegation continue to present proposals addressing forest and watershed health and NRCS private lands conservation programs that would be included in the Farm Bill for 2022 fund. So a lot happening in Congress. Lastly, I just want to note that the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, part of DNR, has provided a summary of avalanche activity for the last winter. From October 1st to May 31st, 2023, there were 5,792 avalanches reported, over 900 human-triggered avalanches, 122 people caught in avalanches, and tragically 11 people killed in avalanches state this past. These sobering statistics highlight the important work of the CAIC and the need for all outdoor recreationalists to use caution when traveling backcountry. So it's hard to think about avalanches given how hot it is, but always important to be considering those things. With that, I'll close my remarks and answer any questions you may have.
Commissioner Heath.
So, Commissioner Heath, what will be the relationship with the Governor's Energy Office then, with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission?
Very good question. There's always lots of informal coordination going on between state agencies, and certainly the role of ECMC around some of these new emerging energy technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, like deep geothermal, were given to what's now ECMC for regulatory authority because they involve managing the subsurface, which is the expertise of the staff and commission at the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. But there are clear policy implications related to energy policy for those activities as well. And so part of DNR's job and staff and leadership at ECMC is to ensure that the protective regulatory regime that they create for those technologies aligns with our state energy policy goals. The governor's very interested certainly in geothermal as an opportunity to expand renewable energy generation in the state. And so there's an interest in promoting some of those technologies, but doing it in a way that aligns with OGCC's protective regulatory regime for oil and gas, applying that to these new technologies. So I think there is an interplay there. The ECMC's role is ensuring that we develop those things safely.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us today. Are you permanent with us?
We're still working on the
Okay,
transition.
all right. So we shouldn't grow attached
So
yet.
I think what I heard you say, but this is a good point of clarification for me also. An assistant director for lands and wildlife, which was the old Vilsack position. Correct. There's a candidate identified but not yet announced.
Sounds good.
Yeah, got it. And historically, that has been the interface to us. And your focus is more on renewable. You're the same level as that person, and your focus is on renewables and energy policies.
All energy
All
policy,
energy
absolutely. And so I think we will determine sort of who the right person is to be DNR's representative in the interim with Vanessa's leaving while we're hiring that new person. But I'm certainly happy to be a resource if you need it.
This is great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we are moving on to our business items. The staff report, which the most exciting part was the drought news, which we now know is better than what was in the staff.
Well, there were
report
some
for a
pretty
minute.
exciting things.
It was,
in there.
there's other exciting things. Yeah, I don't think I ever remember Colorado having this view
Exactly.
throughout
No
county.
colors on the map.
It's
Yeah.
just crazy. It's great. Anyway, anything else on that?
I'll just hit a couple highlights for you. As you all know, the Pico Basin RFPs out in the market, and we had 27 groups go on a tour. Pretty excited about that. I think we had some good, robust responses on that important asset. We have hired a South Region Resource Specialist, Jesse Price. And so we still have one resource specialist position open, and we've got that position description out in the market right now. But typically we have 3 of those folks on our staff, in addition to helping support the district managers. That's also become bench strength for us when we've had district managers move on. So in that resource specialist role, they get to know our assets and our customers. They assist with inspections and all the on the ground work. And then it's really become a nice pipeline for us for talent generation internally. So we've hired one, we have 2 on staff and 1 open position still. In our effort to continue to not only practice good stewardship ourselves and encourage our partners to do the same, we are having a 3-day adaptive grazing management workshop to which we've invited 16 lessees. Somebody was getting me the stats on how many landboard acres and more importantly, how many fee acres of land that represents. But I love the power of leverage of this, that, you know, we may be covering 30,000 of our own acres, but 200,000 total acres. And so wonderful that that class is full. It's a pretty intensive 3-day workshop. And we're excited to do that as part of our commitment to stewardship. And really, those were the things I want to highlight. Happy to answer questions.
I did have one question, Commissioner Fogier. The nature of the questions from the agricultural population. William was at I think the summer meeting. What is the nature of the questions around the carbon capture sequestration activities and concerns?
This is Greg Okish, Assistant Director. There were concerns, we had sure we'll put in the staff report there, we had a follow-up meeting as a result with some of the local folks up in Northeast Colorado, where the projects is. They were first and foremost didn't feel like our lessee was giving them enough information. So they were not sure what it was, and what was going to happen, and when it was going to happen. There were concerns about pipeline rights of way. There have been some conversation, as I understood it, conversation about needs for pipeline rights of way, and that was essentially up to them whether they wanted to accommodate those or not. And I would say there's some general skepticism about technology. How do we know it's not going to leak? How do we know it's not going to come back to the surface? So those were, I think, probably the 3 general themes.
Thank you, that's useful.
Commissioner Hayes?
Yes, related to Chico Basin, I wanted to note for the board that I had a call from Linda Hodges. And she asked the board to consider whether or not we would be willing to continue the birding lease through January 2025. She was told, and the birding group she represents was told that the board might want to change that. And I don't think we as a board have any reason to change that. They're told it would be changed in August of 2023. And that was for bird banding at Chico Range. So I don't know that we've had any conversation about wanting to change that. And
I'm sorry, change. Greg Oakes, Assistant Director, to change what?
so I guess she was told that there would be a change for the birding lease on Chico Basin Range that would now begin in August of 2023.
Yes.
Instead of continuing their current lease, until January of 2025. And she said that would impact them because it would be more limited. And I'm not aware of what to respond and wanted to ask just more about that.
Sure, I can fill you. I will say I'm disappointed she reached out to a commissioner because we've been having extensive conversations with her for months. If you recall, when we went through the whole Chico Basin process, one of the things this board said was that you were supportive of staff finding a way to maintain. So they don't have a lease with us right now. They don't have a lease with anybody. They have an informal agreement with the current agricultural lessee that they can use they can access the Chico Basin Ranch. And this board encouraged staff to create an agreement that would allow them to continue that once the new agricultural lessee is in place. Does that ring a bell? That foundationally, because then I'll go from there. So, and the same thing with the bird banding station. So there were two activities. There were the Audubon recreational bird watchers, and there was the, I can't remember what they're calling, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies bird banding station. So we reached out to both of them, offered them both no cost agreements to maintain their activity on the ranch. There were extensive conversations around the terms and conditions, essentially with Audubon, focusing on Audubon, that their access was limited to, just as it is. They told us they only use the ranch primarily during the migratory seasons. And so we created agreements whereby, and it's the same for the banding station. So we created agreements whereby both groups would have access to the ranch for, I think it's 6-week periods in the spring and the fall. I think the only requirements we put on them were that they use designated parking areas, provide a porta potty, provide a volunteer to the bird banding station. So instead of rent, we said we'd like you to provide a volunteer to the bird banding station. They requested and we gave them the right to do fundraising events. And we required that some percentage of the revenue they get from charging access. So they're going to charge people to get on the ranch. Those activities go back to the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies to support bird banding. Abe Medina, our recreation program manager, and I both felt it was important to get those agreements in place as early as possible to formalize that. And so when the new ag lessee or lessees come on, there's an existing condition in place that they accept as this is the way things work. What Ms. Hodges said was they wanted to delay, since they had this informal agreement with the Phillips family, as long as possible. And what I think that comment that resonated with me that she shared with you is said, we have a board who's directed us to do this. I don't know who the board's going to be in 2 years. And a future board might say, not such a good idea. Why are you bringing this to us? We don't agree. It should be not. So I said, it's totally up to you. If it were me, I would get this agreement in place while the current board who supported this idea is still seated. And that's sort of where we left it. And I think that's where she called you.
And so that it is a condition precedent, it's a known condition for the new lessee.
I agree with that, and I guess what I would say is, my understanding was what she thought was a limited number of weeks and limited number of burgers. I think that's something I'd ask you if you could revisit that with her. We can't handle it right here, but I didn't feel that it was an intention of this board to limit the bird banding exercise.
The Audubon has nothing to do with the bird banding.
And I'm
Okay.
just talking
So,
about the bird
yeah.
banding.
Oh, bird banding is, Linda Hodges is with Audubon. Bird banding is a different.
Well, I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
I'm just asking if you might be willing to revisit that.
The bird banding folks have raised no concerns with us about what they've been offered. Audubon would like, honestly, they'd like 24/7 access to the ranch, and that does not work well for
And
us.
I guess I would say, the statement things that the board might change, that relates to all of them.
That's what I shared with Greg. I just, right now, I've got direction to make something happen. I'd like to make it happen to ensure you have what you asked for. And so we can certainly continue the conversation. Abe is working to get them both leases for signature, and to her concerns, has offered them a 6-month grace period whereby we would sign the lease in September. But they would not have to fulfill any of the responsibilities in the lease until next spring, which would be the first time they would have access to the ranch under the. We will continue to kind of find a happy place.
If I can just add, we certainly, we are here to serve the public, and that is important. I think in a case like this, so however, it's something that sounds like if there is additional communication that needs to be had, it would be great to have this person come and air that for all of the board members. Have public comment. But generally speaking, I just want to put on the record that we would prefer that folks not try to get to us individually. We are not here as rubber stamps for what comes from the staff, but we do need to respect overall processes. And I just, want to state for the record as well that is the preference, that folks can come and talk to the board and bring things that aren't on the agenda to public comment, but not to try to get to each of us individually and bypass other conversations that need to happen with staff.
So, Commissioner Lee, I appreciate the feedback. We will continue to work on it, and I will ask Abe to put something in staff report once we've reached a resolution.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Clark, we appreciate the public statement. We're trying to avoid folks calling you all as individuals as well. And I think in this particular instance, our staff has gone above and beyond. Period.
Well, and I don't want to speak for all the commissioners, but I'm going to make that assumption. I don't want to suggest that it's not okay for people to call commissioners. We're public appointed individuals. We delegated matters to staff, but I don't think it's inappropriate for people to call various commissioners. And when that happens, I think when it's appropriate, we share it with their colleagues. So I want to just be clear that I think it is appropriate for folks to call commissioners.
I've had phone calls as well. And what I usually say is, frankly, I don't know enough of the detail to be super helpful in terms of what the conversations they're going back and forth with staff are. So I always ask that they engage with staff, and happy to come to our meetings, do follow some of that, just so we could all hear and learn at the same time, rather than presuming what the staff conversations have been that we haven't been privy to. So I think there's a balance with it all.
Yeah.
So I echo all my colleagues' comments. All right, with that, our guest star today, State
Just throw in one comment to
Yes.
support staff on this. It does, we'll deal with it, but it does make record challenges. Or challenges defending the record when there are conversations outside of public meetings. So just another
Yeah,
element to keep in mind.
I really like the idea of them being encouraged to offer public comment. So then we all get the same information at the same time. Staff is here to also support where
For
we,
being Chris and Aaron, that is helpful and supportive.
okay,
That's.
no, I understand.
That's
I
certainly
understand
be
that.
Driving how you guys interact with folks, but
Yeah.
I would appreciate it if, we would all appreciate if you keep that in mind.
Okay,
It does create those challenges.
of course, that makes sense. So David, you're on a couple of times with us today.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you. And we are talking tower site business plan, and then later you'll see that we have a policy related to this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Nice to see you all today. David Rodenberg with the Real Estate Group. Today I'm wearing my cell tower site manager hat. And this is an information item to provide a summary of the tower site business plan and to answer any questions or address any comments that the board may have regarding that business plan. The first tower site business plan was first established in 2017 And it is the board's goal to update business plans every 5 years. And as such, this business plan is due for review and update this year. So the business plan describes the strategies and actions that State Land Board staff will take in order to optimize the financial returns to the trust, minimize negative impacts, and protect important natural values, and determine the best manner in which to achieve the best results from the business program. So this map, I wanted to show you all, this is the portfolio that the board has. Should have put this after the next slide, but this is basically 30 leases that the board currently has. And as you can see, it's pretty spread out throughout the state. We even have some down here in Montezuma County. There's actually 3 leases on this dot here. But again, just an idea of our overall portfolio and the locations of the tower sites. So the State Land Board currently has 30 leases. Our annual lease revenue has increased $144,000 over the past 5 years. And the total current annual lease revenue is $500,000 per year on those 30 leases. We have actually executed this graph. It indicates there's 2 new leases since 2017, but in actuality, we executed a few more leases than that, new leases. But we've had some cancellations due to the Sprint T-Mobile merger that occurred. And then there's also just inherently several leases that have just terminated because of the lessees not wanting to keep those leases. So I wanted to show that there's actually, there's 5 different categories that we have for tower site leases. We have wireless PCS, which is your typical cell phone type lease, TV radio broadcast, broadband, RRT, which is reflectors, repeaters, and translators for wireless signals, and then PMR and EMR. And PMR is private mobile radio, two-way communication, and EMR is emergency mobile radio. So the State Land Board's portfolio consists, we have at least 1 lease in all those categories, but the majority of our leases is under the wireless PCS and the two-way communication categories. So this slide shows sort of the range and number of leases in each of those categories. Yep.
David, I'm curious, of those categories, the relative profitability as between the categories. I would imagine that PCS, the commercial would be more profitable per lease than, private and RRT.
Absolutely. And there's some slides coming right up that will show you that.
We don't have the slides.
There you go. So I wanted to talk about the pricing a little bit in an effort to create consistency in our tower site pricing and efficiency in our leasing process. The State Land Board hired a consultant back in 2016 to prepare recommendations to the agency and how to approach pricing our tower sites. Prior to this, it was a one-off negotiation each time, back and forth with, and of course, staff had limited knowledge of the overall market of these things and just tried to negotiate as best we could with that information. But this information that we got from the consultant, the results that the State Land Board are based on use and location. So at the top of this slide, you'll see the 5 different categories that I mentioned earlier. And then the location are these 5 different zones throughout the state. So for example, and Denver would be a prime urban area. And for a wireless PCS, we would get up to close to $30,000 and then as low as $10,000. For a parcel that's in Durango, for example, we would get around $13,000 a year in revenue and $7,000, close to $8,000 in revenue for the lower category. And then these numbers increase 3% each year. So this whole chart will increase 3% as time goes on. So this map represents those colors that you see here. It represents the rural areas, which is most of the state. And then it's hard to see here, but the Denver metro area is the area. Then you have these other various areas as well. So when studying the market, it was determined that there are 4 key factors that influence the tower site market. The number of cell phones, smartphones in use, the amount of data used by each device, internet wireless broadband data, and the number of tower sites required to achieve coverage and facilitate this data transfer. So smartphones, for example, as we all know, has increased pretty dramatically over the years. So in 2011, 35% of all Americans had a cell phone, smartphone. And now in 2022, that increased to 86% of all Americans have smartphones. So, and that continues to increase. Regarding the data, as you can see from the chart, in 2010, there were 0.4 trillion megabytes of data going across the infrastructure. And since then, 2021, it's increased to 53.4 trillion megabytes. Now, regardless of trillions and megabytes and all that information, point is it's increased dramatically 2010 to the current times. And we expect that it's just only going to increase over time. So wireless technology started with 1G, which is referred to as first generation technology. It started in the 1980s, and back then it was literally just voice, wireless voice, and texting. Since then, we've gone through 2G, 3G, and 4G, and now we're currently at 5G, which is 5th generation technology. And the benefits of 5G is the increased data speeds that it's capable of, the increased network capacity, lower latency. Latency is the time it takes for the data to transfer back and forth, improved reliability and security, and also it enables new applications and services, which we'll talk a little bit here in this next slide. So with 5G, we have the ability to have virtual augmented reality, 4K and 8K video streaming, remote robotic surgery, autonomous vehicles, and the Internet of Things. I'm not sure if I defined this in the business plan, but the Internet of Things is essentially the interconnection via the internet and wireless of our computing devices in our homes, such as cameras, alarms, other things like that. So because of all these new applications, the market is being driven by the increasing demand for mobile data services and broadband deployment of 5G networks. This, along with the need to provide coverage to areas that are underserved, such as rural areas, create the potential need for more tower sites. So the Colorado market, with the market data that we researched, there wasn't really anything specific to Colorado, although we can say that because of population growth, clearly there's going to be a more demand for data use, cell phones, there'll be more cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. Geographical considerations, Colorado's diverse terrain requires more cell towers to get the information to these rural areas, just because of the up and down of the terrain and the mountain areas. And providers need to ensure coverage across these varied landscapes. And then there's outdoor recreation. Colorado is renowned for its outdoor recreational activities, including skiing, hiking, and mountain biking, and people that engage in these activities would like to be connected most of the time. So we feel the Colorado market is relative to the overall market nationally. So staff determined that there are 3 overarching goals for the tower site program. Each of these goals have more specific goals that will help staff achieve each of the bigger picture goals. And these overarching goals I listed here. Goal 1 is to implement pricing and business practices that optimize revenue from existing leases. And this includes applying rent increases on extensions and renewals where we can. And to identify opportunities for companies to use existing towers. So we have co-locations on a lot of our towers, or some of our towers, and to be able to collect revenue on those additional co-locations is just easy money for us, because it's not any more of an encumbrance to us on the site at all. So the second goal is to issue new leases and to grow the business. And in order to do this, maintaining existing relationships and creating new relationships is important to meet this goal, along with maintaining a robust website to get the word out about our smooth process for issuing cell tower sites. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that we run into is the fact that we're a government agency. I think people naturally just sort of try to steer clear of us, but we try to let people know about our line of business and the fact that it's actually a pretty smooth process. We obtained a Dish Network cell tower site lease actually from one of our relationships and attending a CAWA event. CAWA stands for Colorado Wireless Association, and we specifically obtained the lease because of that relationship. So there's benefit to that and doing more of that if possible. Goal 3, require a high standard of care for tower site lessee. This is even though tower sites are a small footprint, and as a result, a small impact on state trust lands, they're still managed in a manner that protects the natural values present on any given site. So stewardship is obviously still very important for us here, and we collect performance bonds that we hold for the life of the lease. And that keeps our lessees on tack to make sure that the site is taken care of. And of course, if there's any issues that arise, we have that bond in place to address any of those types of issues. So as with all of our programs, there are risks involved with the program. There are more identified in the business plan, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them here. First one being the market. As I mentioned earlier, companies don't necessarily approach the state land board as easily as we would like them to. So relationships are key in getting our name out there, making contacts and letting them know our process is key to help with that issue. The reduction of tower sites due to consolidation that I mentioned earlier is a risk as potentially more consolidations occur. We've lost 2 leases because of the Sprint T-Mobile merger, as a matter of fact. And then the emerging technology, this is sort of a gray area because we don't know what that will be, but certainly there's potential like for satellites technology to replace the potential need for cell towers as well. I'm not a technology expert in that area, but just something that we think about as a potential risk. And then lastly, not enough resources being applied. So and that leads me to the next slide. So our current resources is 1 FTE, which is me, that manages the tower site line of business, the renewable energy line of business, and the right-of-way line of business. And renewable energy and right-of-way line of business are pretty active programs and pretty busy. We also have the transaction records and services team that supports me and all 3 of those programs. And of course, last but not least, our HE's office, which has been very helpful with certain matters in those areas as well. And then, of course, future resources. So part of this plan is to consider and determine whether or not the line of business is there's enough business out there to support more resources. And so that's one of our goals. I think it's goal 2. Some of our sub goals is to analyze that and determine whether or not it makes sense to do that. That's all I have in summary. There's a lot more detail in the business plan. And if you guys have any questions or comments or input, I'd be glad to discuss that.
David, can we go back one slide? I would, so first of all, I think you did a nice job, so I'm gonna highlight something here a little differently than you did, but it's a little nitpicky. I would say that the right of, I will tell you all, the right, we don't treat rights of way as a line of business, so I think what we would say is line of business is something we're proactively trying to grow, and we have a plan to do it, and we intentionally said that rights of way we will be more reactive to. It doesn't diminish the amount of work David has to do. I just want to distinguish that there's no business plan for rights of way. And then maybe as a segue, Commissioner Fro on the spot, we had an interesting conversation yesterday. It sort of begged the question about, and I think David touched on it at the end, the investigation we're proposing is as part of this over the next 5 years, run into the next 5 years is, should we put more resources in this and try to grow it? Or is it really a line of business? Might it be treated more like rights of ways, a more responsive, reactive sort of posture? And
This is where we're currently at. For the most part.
for the I'd say that with the business plan, I think you do a terrific job. Very little of David's time is available for this, but given that he's very effective at, as you said, industry events, has a set of contacts and relationships that know to reach out to, that starts to, that's sort of my definition of it's almost the line of business thing. So, you know, I guess I'd be interested in, as David said, feedback maybe around the topic of what do you all think? Is this a line of business and you should assign more resources, or is this something we'll accommodate when it comes along, but not proactively try to grow? That isn't it.
Yeah, we did, it was a great conversation and sort of begged even a larger question, which I know you all get into and we'll be considering, which is those questions about resource allocation, you know, are most effectively dealt with comparing all the lines of business and then actually allocating all the costs against those and trying to determine, you know, the marginal profitability, which isn't the only driver, but is certainly a place to start. And, you know, even looking at this, thinking about the revenue generated, even in this portfolio for you, David, I can't recall right away, but first of all, congratulations. I was impressed with how in this line of business in your spare time, you got it from whatever, like up to 500,000, it was like $150,000. Right? Congratulations, that was really great. But the comparison of the relative profitability, even within your portfolio and then across the state land board and allocating costs that way seemed to be an interesting thing to look at. And then my follow-up question specifically about the tower business plan was, it seems like it's in large part geographically driven, right? So there's a need with a certain amount of demand, then there's geographic considerations, which aren't that flexible. I'd be curious, like how far they can go away from where they need to be. But secondly, how much you suspect, subject to confirmation, that the relationship management could truly drive a site location decision. You know, are you seeing that the perception of bureaucratic obstacles prevents people actively from doing it? And so this would be easy business should you be able to communicate that there in fact is multiple opportunities with one phone call?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I've made an effort, more effort in the past regarding, you know, really reaching out to the different folks. It seems like just the turnover is a big issue.
Yeah.
Make one contact, that person's gone, so I got to re-educate folks about that. But I think it's been indicated to me that there's definitely people thought because we're a state agency that it's much more cumbersome rather than dealing with 5 individuals. And then after talking with these people, I think their minds have really been changed as far as that opportunity. I think timing wise, you know, these guys are sort of in their rears with their planning, right? They have, you know, they have their areas that they're concentrating on, especially the folks that I'm talking to now. And they've already sort of set out where they're looking at. And I get phone calls occasionally regarding new tower site leases in different areas, but it's just not, I think we got the word out more. I think there'd be more potential and opportunity. I think
quick follow-up and then I'll turn it over to fellow commissioners, and that is, I think you mentioned that you were going to do an evaluation of whether or not it made sense, that whether or not more resources could actually drive more revenue. What's the, like, how would you do that?
It's a good question. I think our intention is to work with an outside consultant to help determine that potential. Because all the research that I've done is in the business plan and it doesn't really answer that question fully. So I think we need some help with answering that question.
There is a, I believe this is correct, there's a broker network for these kinds of things, isn't there? So one thought was we reach out to the broker network and maybe they convince us that we should just outsource this whole thing. And to David's, and I'm not sure I have a much better answer or a great answer to your question. At this point, we need to give some thought. I don't know how.
I would just add to that, I think your supposition earlier that there's sort of a finite place where the things gotta go, right? There's a coverage map, and so we need it to be here. And either we own the land there or we don't own the land there. I'm not sure how much influence David can have. Knowing the folks, and being easy to do this, if that's all good, but at some point, it's got to be in location A, and we're either there or we're not there. And as a practical matter, where you really need these things is sort of in the dense urban stuff and along the highways. We don't have a lot of that. And so, if you're building towers out in the Eastern Plains, we have a lot of that, but that doesn't seem to be where the high-paying sites want to go.
Another thought, sorry, how we're going to do it. I would really like to sit down with David Snap and ask them some questions like, if we were your go-to location, as long as we had land, you'll put it on us. Here's our rate schedule. If you do 25 leases a year with us, we'll cut our rates. We'll cut your rate, so you'll get a discount with us, or basically master leasing a whole bunch of sites or something. I just don't know the industry well enough to be able to answer the question, but I'd like to. I think we could tap into people he knows, just sort of say, how do we grow this business in a way that's good for people?
We're just following up on Bill's comment about, we know there's a huge need on the Eastern Plains. If we can be any part of that solution set, I think that would be great. And maybe that means these are smaller, I'm guessing these will be smaller types of, not the big companies that want to go out there, but smaller ones. And maybe there's a way we could have a rate that fits that environment, because that's where the need is. When we can't get cell service, there's no broadband. That's a problem. I think part of the problem is, how do you entice anyone to want to be out there?
That's a good point. Like, most of my contacts are larger companies. That was our focus, American Towers, Crown Castle. And in the past, it was directly with the cell companies, but now it's more the cell or the tower site managers.
Right.
It's kind of moved to that direction. But that's where my focus has always been. It hasn't been the smaller entities like we're talking about.
It just seems like that's the higher need.
Yeah.
And well, it may not be a huge line of business for us. It would be something when we have nothing, and really, perhaps help as a solution.
That triggers a thought too. I don't know if this happened, but it seemed like, doesn't the state, or hasn't it in the past, made available funds to support and expand internet and Wi-Fi and cell connections in the east? And is there a coordination here within the state where there's a pot of
Commissioner
money?
Heath to ask the question, because I know it's near and dear to your heart, the whole rural broadband and how do we get the high-speed internet to the rural parts of our state. And maybe you want to speak to how that's occurring. But yes, there are big buckets of money intended to do that, but it's apparently a lot harder.
It's very difficult.
Pull off.
EagleNet was around, I don't even know if that still exists, for 10 years with limited success.
Yeah, and one of our recent leases was a relay, a smaller company, but a relay tower site up in Jackson County, I believe it was. But to get broadband out to that particular area. But again, I don't think we have the contacts for
Right.
those entities. I think that's an area that we should definitely focus on a little more. I think the other thing that you mentioned is key too, is the pricing.
Mhm.
We have sort of our set pricing here, but maybe there's another category.
That's a little different.
Yeah, and the pricing does, if you go back to the slide, it does reflect.
Yeah.
Rural
Right.
versus urban, but so I want to be a little careful about.
I
was the first
agree.
to say it.
There's different kinds of rural though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
I don't know, it'd be something worth, I think, at least finding out a little bit more about, and if pricing's the issue, we certainly could address that, but I would like to. I know schools struggle out there, COVID was devastating, you know, trying to find hot spots for kids to even drive in a car, their parents drive them to, so they could get service.
So this whole conversation gets a little bit to that chicken and the egg thing, which is. I think as you are describing, there's probably an opportunity. David hasn't had the luxury of the time
Totally
to
get that.
investigate it.
Yeah.
And so back to his comment, maybe there's some dollars that we can use to hire somebody to come
That'd be
suss it
helpful.
out for us and point us in the right direction. And if there's enough of a picture there of growth and opportunity, then maybe there's more FTEs assigned to it. Maybe there's not, but yeah, it's been sort of a,
Mhm.
we think it's there, we don't have time to go figure it out.
Mhm.
Do that.
Right. It's not just the Eastern Plains, it's the Four Corners
Yeah,
area,
I think
it's all over.
Mountainous topography, which drives a need for more tower density.
Right.
But this is really interesting.
Yeah. No, I'd be supportive of getting some help to at least investigate, is there a role we could play? I mean, it's great to make the money, and you've done an amazing job, but I also think there's also we do own a lot of land in areas without much coverage. So maybe there's something there.
So are we saying that we'd like to authorize a certain amount of money for him to please hire a consultant or kind of what direction?
I'm guessing you might be able to just do that under your own.
Yeah,
purview
Yeah,
without-
sure.
Right, so you're supportive of it.
Yeah, this is just information on the business plan.
Unless it's gazillions of dollars, then you have to come back.
But that's what policy.
Yeah, exactly.
One last thought, being that this is a regulated business, don't understand it at all. But there may be some kind of connection, thinking about pricing concessions, regulatory concessions. I don't know how they think about granting, rewarding, allocating all the
Oh,
licenses and, again, being a state function and we're the state and trying to make life better. I don't know. Could be a red herring, but
It's funny, we always tell people that we're not a regulatory agency, so we're just like a private landowner,
right.
that sort of thing, so,
Yeah.
but
Find out from them to get, what can they do to help us put towers on our land?
absolutely.
And I think understood underneath all of this is $500,000 is a lot of money. From a state land board portfolio and asset perspective. Probably the most important consideration in the business plan and the implementation of it is. Ensuring that we have the right set of considerations, which I believe we probably do, to not impair the value of the assets. With a seemingly innocuous tower site. And I know that's throughout our whole business here, but I just wanted to mention it.
All right, terrific. Thank you.
Thank
And we'll
you
be
so
seeing
much,
you
Dave,
again
for-
here in a few minutes. All right, we also have another information item related to our oil and gas business plan. Thank you, Crystal. Great to spend time with you yesterday as well. Okay.
So Crystal, thank you for yesterday. It was really a useful day in terms of.
Glad you guys learned some.
Just click the mouse screen once and the keyboard will be your navigator.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. Crystal Crane, the Minerals Director. I'm going to go over the oil and gas business plan with you. And again, just with David, it's nothing that we're going to be voting on, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. We update this plan about every 5 years, we do update it every 5 years and just to reflect market changes, strategies that we're listening. And I'm gonna go over things high level, but stop me at any time if you have any questions. So the main goal of the plan is to promote responsible and timely development of state land board oil and gas resources and manage the impacts of development on natural values of state trust land. So this is the overarching theme. So this is what we really thought about in the background when making all the goals and everything that went into this business plan. Oh, this is not the current one. Did you?
It's the one that was there yesterday or this
Yeah.
morning.
Oh, I just added some slides. Well, that's okay. They weren't really that important.
Just takes a few seconds. That's what.
Sean got me a map yesterday, but we were
On
so
the road.
I added it this.
So it's Sean's fault.
So it's Sean.
Right.
It's definitely not. No. I'm just fine. I can.
Well,
We were just talking about how. Fair enough, Sean.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, they're looking for a slightly different slide deck.
I added some slides this morning, so that was the stand-in slide for what? My final slide's bigger.
This is us.
Okay, so just go off, we'll just go off the unpretty
it's
version.
gonna take me 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, so my other one is prettier, but basically, it would highlight where these leases are located on the map, but we have roughly 900 oil and gas leases, which covers 400,000 acres, which is 10% of the mineral estate. 452 of those leases are in production, meaning that they have a well that's been drilled on them that's producing oil and gas. There are 378 that are in the first 5 years, so they don't have a well that has been drilled on them. You get 5 years to drill that well. And then 65 are shut in, which is basically they flipped a switch and it is turned off right now, but can easily be turned back on. So this is a graph just of the revenues over the last 5 years. And at the bottom row, you can see the percentage of state land board revenues that oil and gas has contributed. So it is the majority of the land board's revenues, anywhere in the last 5 years from 70 to 80%. And of the revenues that we receive, I've highlighted here the top row, oil royalties are really where the money's at. That's where majority of the money is coming in. Gas royalties are still significant, but as you can see, every year the oil royalties are always the highest. And over the last 5 years, that has brought in $579 million for the trust. And I think what I have heard is maybe we can add around 200 million to that for this year. So it was a really great year this year as well.
Crystal, one quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was a bonus money was 15 million in 2017. And then a more normal pattern after that. What happened?
I wonder if that was the time period when
The end of Bonanza and the
Yeah.
end of Lowry.
we had a bonus for when we leased Lowry and when we leased the hog farm or
70 ranch.
70 ranch. We had split up the bonus payment, so they paid the bonuses in installments each year, so we had larger bonus.
Intentionally.
Yeah, well, that was intentional because there was statute at the time that affected our distributions.
Oh, okay.
And those were, in one case, a $60 million bonus, and in the other case, a $130 million bonus. So rather than take those all into income at once, we spread them out over 5 years.
And so I think the takeaway here is when I'm looking at the next 5 to 10 years, I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the energy transition, but I don't foresee there being any drastic cliff or drop in revenue in the next 5-10 years. I think oil and gas is going to remain stable and still continue to be the largest revenue supporter for the landlord.
Even though I get that wrong every year.
We'll never know the number, but yes, I don't think it's going anywhere. And so I just decided to look at the business plan and see what happened over the last 5 years and kind of pick out some highlights. So I have here 93% of the DJ Basin is leased. So statistically, I had Katie map how many acres we have in the DJ and what percentage is actually leased, and that was 93%. However, when we dug closer into the 7% that's unleased, I think a lot of that acreage is unleasable. A lot of it's in Boulder County and maybe under a school. There are reasons why it hasn't been leased. So I think the takeaway for us is that majority of our land in the DJ in these producing areas that have been proven is leased and is not available. So we've leased. And then we saw a ton of oil volatility. Prices were trading anywhere between $20 and $110 a barrel over the last 5 years. We even had one day for the first time ever in history that oil traded negative, negative $37 a barrel. So that had never been seen before. Prices were all over the place. We also experienced a helium shortage. And so what I thought is interesting is that helium is not evenly dispersed around the globe. The United States has 40% of the helium reserves, and 6 countries make up 94% of the world's helium. So when the shortage happened, it really spurred exploration here in the United States. Here in Colorado, there's potential in southeastern Colorado and south central. So we saw leases have picked up in that area, and they haven't stopped. They're doing tests, and what we've heard is that a lot of these tests are good. So we're really hoping that they're able to find helium, and then that's going to bring in additional revenues to the land board. And I think people commonly know helium is used for balloons, but it's used for a lot of other purposes as well. A lot of scientific research.
Like munchkins.
Yeah, yes. Munchkin voices. And it's also the main component for MRI machines. So MRI machines at hospitals can't work without helium. It's a pretty important resource. We also saw a lot of changes with the COGCC, ECMC, that new mission that they changed from fostering oil and gas to regulating oil and gas was huge. That brought new rulemaking. That also brought more local control, local government interaction, and their name change, which now encompasses that they are carbon management as well. And they're kind of focusing on more than just oil and gas. So mergers and acquisitions, this was also a huge trend. If you had asked me 5 years ago to give a list of the landlord's top 10 players, out of that list, 8 of those have now consolidated and merged, and to 2 mega companies. So they're actually the 2 companies that we spoke with yesterday. Chevron, which is now Chevron, Noble, and PDC. And then Civitas, which is Crestone Peak. They purchased ConocoPhillips asset in this region. Extraction, Bonanza, and High Point. So one good thing that comes out of that, when the companies become bigger, they have a lot more capital to throw into projects that have maybe been put on pause. And they also, talking about the COGCC rulemaking that just took place, there's a lot more stringent regulations here in Colorado now. And these bigger companies have the capital and the funds to meet those regulations and those challenges. And so it provides a lot more efficient and environmentally friendly drilling here, or responsible drilling here in Colorado. All right, so I want to switch a little bit to the market analysis. When David just got up here, or any of the other business plans you're going to hear, staff really comes up with the goal of how do we grow this line of business? How do we make more money for this line of business? Well, that is almost impossible in the oil and gas sector because there are so many variables outside of our control and so many things that we can't predict. And that's not to say that staff can't move the needle. We implement practices every day, which I think bring in a lot of money for the landlord. For instance, if I have Katie do some audits and she brings in $1 million, you all may not know about that because the price of oil changed and brought in $70 million extra dollars that year. So sometimes we do implement things that bring in money, but it's just not always seen. So I kind of wanted to walk through some of these major factors that are affecting oil prices. So first we have our friends, Russia and Saudi Arabia. Back in 2020, they got into a price war, which affected the market here in Colorado. We have OPEC, which is a consortium of 13 countries, and they decide how much oil to release based off their own government needs. That affects the price. We have Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which greatly affected the oil prices. There's been increased standards of living in China and India. COVID-19 was a huge disruptor to the oil prices. During COVID, no one wanted to travel anywhere or go anywhere. And then after COVID, everyone wanted to go everywhere. The prices changed again. We have new drilling technologies that can produce more supply, which affects things. We had pipelines shut down that limited oil supply in some regions, which affected pricing. Natural disasters, tornadoes, earthquakes, renewables are getting cheaper, electric cars, so on and so forth. So even if you could potentially predict one of these, there are 30 other factors that are going to affect that price. So it's really hard for us to try and substantially grow. So just like I was talking about, here's a chart over the last 10 years of oil prices and the volatility of where they've been. I have circled and focused in on 2019 to 2020, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then going more closer, this is a graph of the state land board. And what we did here is from that time period, 2019 to 2022, we looked at how much did we receive in royalties and how many barrels of oil were produced? Is there any sort of correlation between how much they're producing versus what we get paid? And what we found that's interesting is here in 2019, we received around 100 million in royalties and we produced about 50 million barrels of oil. In 2022, we received 120 million in royalties, but they produced about half of that. So even though production dropped in half, we received 20 million more in royalties. And if I go back to that initial chart, for these 3 years, our royalty really followed that trajectory of oil pricing. So even though production can maybe influence us, and this may just be for this time period, but this time period alone, we strictly followed the price of oil, which is so volatile. It's hard to predict. Now switching gears to natural gas, that's the other commodity that we get paid on. This is just a graph kind of walk you through again how natural gas works. When it comes up out of the well, it is not immediately salable. It can't go into homes for the most part. So it typically needs processing. So it would go here into a processing facility where they remove impurities. And at that point, it is available for sale. So we have methane here. And the rest of the stream is called natural gas liquids. For us, those are transported down to Texas where they're fractionated into ethane, propane, butane, and then these mixes are sold. So we get 67% of our natural gas sales from methane sales and about 33% from natural gas liquid sales. Good question?
No, but that's interesting because I was wondering how, like when in the process gas became liquid. So there's liquefied natural gas is being exported largely, and then there's this, your natural gas liquid. I know there must be different. But
Yeah.
so who's at the processing? Is that when they compress the gas into a liquid to get to the?
It's separated there. Yeah.
It's separated, but then how does it get to be a liquid in the pipeline to go to the fractionation?
I think what you're, let me take a stab at it as a non-expert. I think what we're exporting as liquefied natural gas is methane. That's been turned back, chilled and compressed to turn into
Compressed gas. I mean,
Yeah.
liquid.
and that's happening at the
Process.
near the point of departure. So
Right.
it's happening in this case in Texas, for example.
Or on the East Coast.
Yes.
Is
Is
that
that what you're asking?
From my understanding, I mean, it's in liquid form when it goes to Texas.
So some sort of compression happens.
Yeah.
And moves it to Texas. Okay, anyway, this is just an aha, this is a. great
Wait a minute. Did I miss my fun pictures? No, okay, we're right here. So natural gas pricing, this is the last 5 years. It is volatile as well. and you can see it range from $2 to $6. The biggest difference here is that, you know, that's a 300% increase, but bottom line, because we're dealing with smaller dollar amounts, $2 to $6, when it changes greatly, you don't necessarily see as big of dollar impacts because we're just dealing with smaller dollars in general, but it is volatile as well. And I'll walk through some of the factors that affect natural gas pricing. It's really hot, everyone wants to cool their homes, so that can affect pricing. It's freezing, everyone wants to heat their homes. There's different manufacturing industries and processes that use a lot of natural gas. And it just depends on what's cheapest at the time. They may not always use natural gas, but when the price is cheaper, they start using that in their production facilities. And again, we have Russia and their invasion of Ukraine. They were the major supplier of liquid natural gas to Europe. And whenever the war happened, a lot of the European countries put sanctions on obtaining things from Russia. And so the United States is now the prime supplier of liquid natural gas to Europe. We've stepped into that role. So this is just a prediction from the EIA that I wanted to show up to 2050. They kind of did different scenarios and predicted that the price of natural gas is going to remain between $2.50 to $6. So when we run our models, we still kind of keep it in that time frame just for our estimates. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't touch base on this energy transition and the decarbonization transition that's happening. I think you guys heard that word used a lot. It's something that we're really talking about in oil and gas right now. So I wanted to first take a second to talk about, even though we are having an energy transition and a decarbonization, I think all the analysts that I've looked at have said that there is a place for oil and gas in the future, and that in certain sectors, oil and gas may be going away, and it may be going away at a much faster pace, but in a lot of sectors, it is still needed and is still predicted to be needed even out as far as 20. So when we talk about the transition, I think in some sectors that's happening very quickly, but in others, I think there's still a need for oil and gas, and it does have a place. So while our revenues may eventually down the road someday start to decline, I think it's always going to be needed for certain things. So this is a Bloomberg report, and they analyze different sectors. And so in particular for road, it says road, but it's road fuel. You know, that's where they're really seeing a big decline with electric cars coming on board. There's going to be a decline for oil. However, they do think by 2050, there's actually going to be an increase in demand for oil for aviation and chemical feedstocks, which is what make plastics. And then for other non-energy sources, they believe the demand is going to be pretty much the same out until 2050. But one of the sectors where we are going to see a hit is this energy sector. And so this is an article just talking about renewables, and what I think for so long fossil fuels were at the forefront for energy because it was the cheapest method. You know, nothing could compete with coal, burning coal and natural gas. But now in this article in particular, you can see the cost of megawatt hour for solar back in 2009 was $359 a megawatt hour. Whereas in 2020, that dropped to, well, I can't even read it, but $37. And then the same goes here for wind. It has dropped to $40 from 145, 35. But here the price of natural gas, you know, has remained pretty steady, but is at $59. But stuff that was very unaffordable back in 2009 is now cheaper. So what we're going to see is that it is a major competitor and something that is being switched to in this energy market.
So can I just confirm that I'm assuming that federal credits and rebates and all of that are buried in those numbers? Or is that just a true
That's a good
cost of all the components and activities?
That's a good question. Whenever I've been reading these, I guess they haven't.
Based on other numbers I've seen, that would be the assumption.
Yeah,
especially on that
that's
solar.
what drove
the
it down, and then
solar
some of that enabled some of the technology to make it more efficient so that the cost efficiencies are happening more.
Yeah.
Through true innovation and.
And just to point out, we, here at the land board, we have been trying to see if we are going to lose, revenue potential. Can it be filled with renewables? And we just have found that it doesn't bring in as much money as the oil and gas, so it isn't necessarily a replacement financially. And then here, we heard yesterday from Brad and from Chevron, they're spending a lot of money investing in ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere and inject. These big companies are looking to be energy companies rather than just oil and gas companies. So this is a picture of a DAC machine, a direct air capture. So this would capture CO2 directly out of the atmosphere, and then they liquefy it and inject it for permanent storage underground. And so the reason I put this up here is because when we were looking at the business plan, we were wondering, how do we fit in with these companies and the changes that they're making? And so one of the goals that we talk about in the plan is, can we incentivize working with some of these operators that are making pledges and doing greener development? And how can we have greener development on state land board properties? So that's something we're looking into and seeing how we can achieve that in the next 5 years. So a proposed approach, I'm just going to list the goals. Under each goal in the plan, I had specific strategies. Happy to go over any of those, but the top goals are protect the value of the agency's oil and gas portfolio. So we want to make sure we don't lose any of the assets that we currently have, especially when we're doing sales. We really want to make sure that if we're going to sell a surface, it's not going to strand an asset, that we're still able to access it. Goal 2, increase revenue from existing leases. This is really done mainly by Katie. When we have her look at all of the lease provisions, we have multiple leases over the years, 9 or 10 different lease forms. So we have to look at these leases individually and make sure operators are complying. And if we have operators that are just sitting on a lease and not wanting to drill, we want to turn that lease over to an operator that will get out there and drill. So those are some of the ways that we increase revenue off existing leases. And then goal 3, minimize impacts from oil and gas development on important natural values. So this is our main stewardship goal. This focuses a lot on our collaboration with CPW and even some outside agencies like TNC. And it also is where I have that goal I just talked about, where we're trying to pursue how we can maybe incentivize companies doing carbon pledges, things of that nature. So those goals lie. Goal 4, ensure accurate lease revenue is received. This is where we're relying heavily on finance and our auditors just to make sure the barrels of oil being reported and paid to us are correct. And we have a lot of settlement agreements in place and just making sure that people are paying accordingly. And goal 5, utilizing technology to improve efficiency and effectiveness. So as I said, we have about 900 active leases, and then we have Katie. So we're really trying to find some technology that can help standardize and do a lot of the work, so we're not manually having to touch 900 files every day and try to figure everything out on our own. Resources. So again, we do have Atlas, a program that we use, and we sometimes identify different pain points. And so we're looking at what software might be able to help us or assist us, or consultants for some of these processes. So that's something we're continually always looking into. And then for future resources, I think if you looked at the plan, there are a ton of strategies and ideas for this business line. And it's just really a matter of what is worth pursuing and investing time into, and whether we may need additional resources to pursue all of the goals that are listed in there. So that's something that we'll be looking at here. And then if there ever is a thought that maybe we would need additional resources, we would bring that before the board. But that is all I have for today. Is there any questions?
Terrific presentation. It went so well with our tour yesterday around understanding the process and where we are those opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you.
It'll be interesting with things like the carbon capture and all of that, where we end up in 10 years, you know, as new technologies come online and how that fits with both our lands and business models.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can predict any of it right now.
You've seen, I mean, you'll continue to see that carbon is sort of scattered through a number of business plans right now.
Mhm.
We do envision the possibility, and we're working, Nick is working with the executive director's office on some budget requests for staff around biodiversity and carbon. That at some point in the future, there's an opportunity to put an umbrella over all of these, and what I mean, an individual with a deep expertise in the subject matter to help guide us and grow that. I think it's probably one of the significant opportunities in front of us in terms of this, the transition, both in terms of what we focus on and where our revenue comes from.
Agree.
You mentioned that Colorado doesn't have a mandatory carbon compliance requirement. Do other states?
Right now, California has, it's like the LCFS, low carbon. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but yeah, and then I believe that there's some other eastern states, Washington may be a part of it. I can't remember what Oregon is, but yeah, there are some other states that are participating in. And a lot of these come from legislation that's created by the state that directs companies that they have to meet certain emission goals. And if they go under that goal, then they have additional available that they can sell on a market to companies that may be over the goal. It's like a cap and trade program. So those really don't come into play until your state enacts the regulations necessary to drive that.
You were right, the low carbon fuel standard.
As I was saying, I was trying to like parse each first letter, being like, is that LC?
And add on to that too, that's interesting, it wouldn't affect Colorado quite as much. But the compliance program in California has the perverse consequence, among others, of driving conversion of native grasslands in the northern Great Plains into ethanol that meets the standard for California, because they can generate, premium for that product. So like everything else, yeah, there's a lot to consider.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Why don't we take a little bit of a break and come back a few minutes before 10, maybe a 10-minute break, and we'll just from there finish our session today.
Super hard to stop at 11.
I kind of have to get, I have to be in Summit County by 2.
So yeah, everyone is leaving Denver.
Yeah, everyone is leaving Denver. Okay, are we back on, Nick?
We are back live.
All right, wonderful. We are going to move to final action items. And I suck. There's David, Heidi. We are looking at the policy review tower site leasing agenda item. Thanks, David.
Morning, Commissioners, David Rodenberg with the real estate section. I don't have a PowerPoint prepared for this. Staff feels that the policy effectively supports the board's goals and the program.
Yeah.
We made one minor change to the policy, which was to quantify the cycle of inspections for our power sites. It didn't have a number before, so we specified a 5-year rotation of inspections. And that's the only change we made to the policy. And with that,
Wow,
staff recommends approval of the final action.
Josie could have had another bagel. All right, thank you. Any questions or comments for David from commissioners?
All right, we will open it up to public comment if there's anyone online, Nick.
Ladies and gentlemen of the public, if you'd like to make a comment to the board on this item, please use your raise hand feature. And we'll give you the ability to speak to the board. No raised hands.
Okay, let's go ahead and see if we have a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the tower site leasing policy 600-003 as contained in our board packet and delegate authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with the decision.
Thank you. Motion Commissioner Heath and a second.
A second.
Second Commissioner Fro, who will call a vote. Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Fro,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
and the chair votes yes, that passes 4-0. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time this morning with us too.
Thank you for your input.
80. We're moving on to the oil and gas lease auction for August.
Click on there.
Good morning, commissioners. For the record, Katie Stitt, oil and gas leasing manager. And this morning I have the standard list for the August oil and gas lease auction. So we spent quite a bit of time yesterday and you had a lot of material in your board packet talking about our oil and gas business line. And we mentioned the fact that 88% of our leases that we issue never actually go into production. The trust will receive the auction bonus money if we get any, and also the annual rental payment. But if no production occurs, the leases expire and the lands are returned to our inventory, so to speak, for potential future leasing. So this list represents the 88%. 8 of the 10 were leased multiple times. They've generated bonus money for us. They've given us the annual rental for 5 years, but nothing ever. So we're at round 3 for some of these, and hopefully we'll put them out to market and see what the market says these are worth again. And hopefully they may enter production this time and generate some royalties for us as well. So the August list contains 10 tracts, and it's approximately 2,400 acres for your consideration today. The tracks are outlined in they look red on my screen. I need to come in here more frequently. Color actually in this projector, the reddish dots. That
They're red when
look
you're
black.
red
They're
enough.
It looks black from here. They're located in Adams and Weld counties, and those counties are outlined in the blue in the top center of the map. As I mentioned, these tracts have all been recently leased, several as recently as this past May when they expired. And operators are actively working in these areas. These tracts will be offered at the board's current 20% royalty rate. The auction opens on energynet.com on Thursday, August 10th, and will close the following Thursday on the 17th. So if you're interested in watching, log in on the 17th at about 9 o'clock. That's when all the exciting stuff happens. As mentioned in the cover sheet, the tracts were reviewed for the board's policy. And staff has recommended specific stipulations on all of these tracts as outlined on exhibit 2 to the cover sheet. The stipulations addressing CPW's concerns and staff concerns related to plants and wildlife are currently reflective of CPW's current recommendations. And they've all been reviewed by the board in the past, but I'd be happy to take any questions you might have on these. I know one in particular staff was discussing with the bald eagle active nest. We don't see that stipulation a lot, but it is one of the board's. So that staff is recommending that the board approve the standard list for auction release for the 10 tracts covering 2,400 plus or minus acres, including those stipulations on exhibit 2. And I'd be happy to take any questions or comments on the list. And I do have the board order that was in your. Great. And I just want to thank you, since you're in front of us, for yesterday's tour. That was awesome. And I know it took a ton of work to put together. And you guys show us your depth of knowledge, which is great to see too.
I'm glad that I enjoyed it.
Yes, we did. Any questions for Katie? I don't see any from commissioners. Let's go ahead and open public comment, Nick.
Sounding like a broken record. Ladies and gentlemen out in the audience, if you'd like to make a comment to the board on this agenda item, use that raise hand feature. Got no hands raised.
Okay, with that, we can turn to the board order and we will need a motion.
I move that we approve the standard oil and gas monthly or auction list as presented in our board order.
I think that'll suffice.
Second.
Excellent. And motion, Commissioner Frobe, second, Commissioner Clark. Call a vote, Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you again, Katie. That passes 4-0.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. And that. We are on to the agenda item, Bohart Repeat disposal.
Morning, Commissioners. Matt LaFontaine, Acquisition Disposition Manager. Just point out before we get started, that we have a few attendees in our audience today who are particularly interested in this repeat disposal. We have Wade Shelton, Greg Lambert with NCTPL, and Nate Tanner, sub-lessee of Bohart Ranch, in the audience today, right behind you. So this is the repeat disposal number one, the first of potentially several, which is the Bohart Ranch. And I borrowed this phrase from a prior repeat presentation because I think it really gets to the heart of what we're working to accomplish. And that's really permanent protection of a landscape scale asset in this case, while providing strategic financial outcomes for the state planning board. And it's rare that an opportunity presents itself that the board can achieve full unencumbered pricing on a disposal, knowing that the land will ultimately be conserved in perpetuity outside of the board's ownership. So before I dive into Bohart, I want to do a little recap on REPI. REPI, which stands for the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, is a DoD administered funding mechanism that's really designed to enable military installations to fund easements and acquisitions that protect their mission, so training and military operations. This, for the state land board, is part of a kind of multi-year discussion that kind of started with the military policy and has grown from there as stakeholders have started to weigh in and started to see a framework under which we might be able to accomplish these disposals. Ultimately, DoD identified six sites of interest, or what we call the DoD interest sites, and those are depicted here on your map. All of this is in Colorado Springs kind of general area, but you have Table Mountain, the Aiken Canyon Preserve, the land south of Schriever Space Force Base, and then the Big Springs and Edison properties, and then what we're talking about today, which is the Bohart Ranch. The REPI funding is prioritized and administered at the installation or base level. So there's 3 military bases that are potentially a part of this. You have Fort Carson, you have the Space Force Base, Schriever Space Force Base, and then as pertains to Bohart, Big Springs, and Edison, but Bohart for today's purposes, the Air Force Academy. And if you look to see just generally why Bohart is so important to the Air Force Academy, these kind of green polygons fan out from the Air Force Academy and are aerial training areas that are utilized by the Air Force Academy for its training. And you see one very large and one smaller one that directly overlay both. And then I just want to note that State Land Board staff really sees this as a triple win opportunity. It will support and enhance the military's mission regionally and nationally. It will provide for permanent conservation And it will achieve the state land board's direct financial objectives. Bohart Ranch is located in El Paso County. It totals approximately 48,000 acres. And if we zoom in kind of regionally, I'll point out that Bohart is depicted here with this blue boundary. It's part of a very large kind of contiguous state land board holding, which is the Greater Chico Basin. What we call the Chico Basin Ranch is outlined here in orange. It's all east and southeast of Colorado Springs and northeast of Pueblo. This total contiguous mass is about 250,000 acres, just for reference and scale. Back in January 2023, the board approved the REPI disposal construct, which was a framework that'll allow for the disposal of up to these 6 DoD under sites through a purchase option offering, which is different than how we would typically sell properties, which is just an outright disposal for the entirety of it in a single transaction at a single time. So I want to just recap a few of the important aspects of what that bid process will look like. The purchase option will allow for the selected and determined winning bidder to acquire the entirety of the Bohart Ranch in phases over time. The first phase closing would need to occur within the first 12 months. Subsequent phases would need to occur within 24 months of the previous, and they would occur at the by phase unencumbered appraised value. And I'll touch on this a little bit more, but there's also a kind of a floor limit aspect to this, which is based on the first phases, the first anticipated phases, actual appraised value. There'll be a minimum bid of $50,000, which will be the purchase option B. It's also the bidding variable in this instance. So typically we would put a property out, or under normal circumstances, we would put a property out and the purchase price would be the bidding variable. In this case, because the actual transactions will occur at appraised value, we made the purchase option B the bidding variable. The first $50,000 of that will be creditable to the first phase.
So that, what does an unencumbered appraised value mean?
Yes, thank you for that question. So it's known that there's going to be, and it's going to be mandated that there will be a conservation easement in place on this property outside of the board's ownership. That will not be placed on it under the board's ownership, and it will not be placed on it prior to our disposal. So the property is unencumbered in that it does not have that set of limitations associated with it and does not have the corresponding impairment of value that will come. This next point, in line with that, the purchase option will require that the subsequent or that the option E in place a DoD approved conservation easement. And the entire transaction will be subject to the board standard reservations. So those are the statutory reservations, the reservation of the mineral estate, pore space, and then I'll touch on the Denver Basin groundwater. That's a by policy reservation that I'm going to ask to be waived in part.
One other quick question on the appraised value before we leave this. So is that an appraised as is value? Is it
It is, as opposed to as
a market of something else?
It's an as is.
Yeah.
And it's a use PAP appraisal of the existing conditions of that phase.
Got it. Thank you.
The earlier REPI conversation, in line with our earlier conversations about REPI, we have completed a phase 1 appraisal for what the anticipated phase 1 would be. However, this is still going to go through a bid process. In the event that that's not ultimately the phase 1 that we go forward with because a different winning bidder is determined, then we would have subsequent phase 1 appraisals. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then I just realized there's one other thing on the minimum bid. I believe we heard you say that the first 50,000
Correct.
is credited to the ultimate.
In the first phase closing, correct. So it's a non-refundable option fee that's creditable to the first phase closing. If, say, two parties were to bid on this, one party bid $50,000, one party bid $100,000, then only $50,000 of the second party's bid would be creditable to the first phase closing. But then aggregate net proceeds received by the board throughout the transaction would be $50,000 higher. If that makes sense.
Not quite, hold on. So if, okay, minimum bid's 50,000, if ultimately it becomes 100,000. The first 50,000 of that is being credited to the ultimate purchase price. And the other 50,000 is coming back to,
It's sort of an increase to the purchase price.
got it, thank you.
So now to talk a little bit about the potential phasing, we had set forth some basic guidelines, and this anticipated first phase meets all of those, but I'll walk through them. One, we wanted to ensure that these phase disposals didn't become too protracted or have too small of phases. So we set requirements of 10,000 acres and or $5 million in appraised value. This phase one, which you see depicted here in green, achieves both of those. It's about 11.8 thousand acres and appraised for $8.3 million. And then it was important that the board, not disaggregate Bohart, but rather just shrink its footprint over time and preserve and reserve to the board what we think are the most important aspects of it, both in terms of what DoD priorities are to increase the likelihood of them pursuing this all the way through, but also so there would be the potential to continue operating the ranch at a smaller level in the event that we don't ultimately dispose of all of the cases. So in this case, we're looking at starting in the northwest. The major ranch headquarters are located in this area, and the bullseye, if you recall, the landing strip that the Air Force Academy has right of way to and operates is located roughly here. So the phasing for this is going to be more of a U shape and then coming up and ending ultimately with the bullseye. Is that bullet? So now I'll talk a little bit about the appraisal work that we had done. The appraisal was commissioned through Bill Bortz, and he appraised phase one that I just depicted. His conclusion was that its current market value is $700 per acre. And he concluded the highest and best use was a coordinated marketing and subdivision of the property for development, predominantly residential over time, but maintaining an interim agricultural use while that played out. This is a big shift from, and I think that we were aware that this was occurring, but this is a big shift from kind of previous appraisal work that we had, which appraised it with a highest and best use of strictly agriculture. And that was reflected in the appraiser selected comps. He used a very broad 31 comp set that ran the spectrum from pure agriculture to almost pure development. And I think did an appropriate and good job of kind of trying to figure out where along that spectrum this property lies. It's kind of an in-between property in that it's in the path of development, but it's not ripe for development right now. But both we and the appraiser are seeing, I would say, eye to eye on the future development potential.
So is that in the strategic plan for the development from the county for suburban use, or is it zoned?
So it's currently zoned A35, so agriculture subdividable by right to 35 acre lots. I have not read the El Paso County comprehensive plan, but to my knowledge, this is not a part of that at this time.
But I do think there's residential development coming right up to this section.
Absolutely, and
We could see it sort of coming over the hill, when we were out there.
if you there's private land kind of in between. We have kind of a U shape of ownership, and the private land in between has seen some significant development, but definitely from west to east, increasing development potential.
If I can just piggyback on that quickly. So it's one thing for it not to be in the comprehensive plan, but also that it wouldn't be within the sphere of influence or other kind of additional study area outside of that they are picturing in the future. But I would also hope that that would have been captured in the appraisal. They would look at things like that. Anyway, I guess not really a question, just it is possible that it would be nice to know for sure that it's not been otherwise contemplated.
So I mentioned that one of the state land boards by policy reservations is to preserve the Denver Basin groundwater. As you can see, based on this imagery depiction, this is the Denver Basin boundary, and then Bohart essentially has the northern half within it. In recognition of the fact that this is going to be eased and going to continue forward in most likely in agricultural use in perpetuity. Staff would ask that portion of the policy be waived, allowing us to convey the Denver Basin groundwater rights associated with existing exempt wells, which are currently used for stock domestic residential purposes. But just wanted to explain that aspect.
Sorry. How would that impact the agricultural future use of this property?
I would allow them ownership of the actual water rights,
Them being,
the buyer. As opposed to the board reserving them and holding them in our inventory while disposing of them. And so with that, I put my recommendation on the screen. It's really two parts that the board approved: the public notice, bid solicitation and disposal, the purchase option of the Bohart Ranch, subject to those conditions laid forth in this month's cover sheet and as exhibit the prior January 2023 lead up action item, but also that the board waive its reservation of the Denver Basin groundwater into the existing Denver Basin groundwater exempt wells. At this point, or at this time, are there any questions that I can provide some perhaps more thorough answers?
We've had a lot of conversation about this, so thank you. And do any of your, I'd love to hear from Nate, because you made the journey up and we always appreciate you coming in person. But any of the folks online from TNC want to have any comment as well?
I had spoken with them yesterday, and the idea with having them online was really to field any questions that you might have
Okay.
specific to their work.
I
know.
would just commend you
Yeah.
and the staff and the partners for, I've only joined the process on this halfway through, I guess, but the thoughtful and comprehensive research strategy, everything about this plan. It helps us support decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, come say hello. Okay. I want to check in with you.
Well, there's usually a microphone.
I know, right?
Speak into, but I just wanted to be a part of the discussion and see what was talked about here today. If you want to know really how I'm feeling the whole situation, it would be please keep the Tanners in mind for a future lease. I hope that that's not needed, but anyway, but one comment that I will make that is concerning the groundwater. We all know how precious water is in the Western United States, and particularly the way underground flow is through that range. The last thing that we need is somebody pumping it out to Colorado Springs. That's already happening around us enough. So the groundwater part of this proposal, I think, is particularly important that it be conveyed with the ranch, because it is essential to continuing the ranching operation and continuing the open space and and natural diversity that is there. In my opinion, of course, because of the ranching operation, but that's very important, and I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Good to see you.
Can I ask on that? Maybe I'm just not clearly understanding, but in the proposed recommendation where we waiving the portion of the Denver groundwater that's currently kept by the board, how would this impact what Mr. Tanner has raised?
So what we're proposing is well aligned with what Mr. Tanner has expressed. Under normal circumstances, the board would hold back and not convey those water rights. In this case, they would be conveyed to the subsequent owner to facilitate the continued operation of the.
Very good. Important point.
And as a point of clarification, the well rights outside of that boundary will also be conveyed. Those are not by policy reserved.
Thank you. Without any further questions from commissioners, we'll open it to any public comment related. Yep, I'm sorry. Okay.
Members of the public, use that raise hand feature if you'd like to speak with the board on this agenda item. Not seeing any raised hands at this time.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would like to make a statement before you call for a motion. This is Deborah Froh, Commissioner. I'd like to reiterate a disclosure that I made at prior meetings and lodged with the Secretary of State. In that I am an employee, one of 4,000 at the global entity known as the Nature Conservancy, the Colorado chapter of which is engaged in this transaction to facilitate. I work for the the Canada affiliate, and I have no financial or other interests in this transaction.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge. All right, very good. With that, if we could have a motion.
Sure. I move that the board approve the Bohart purchase option disposal in accordance with the board order as presented in our packets.
Thank you. And a second. Second, we have a motion from Commissioner Clark, second Commissioner Heath. We will call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Froh.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes. That passes 4-0. Thank you again, Matt.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, we are moving on to. We're at Dow Junction, if I remember, yes. And Greg, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Greg Okish, Assistant Director. This is a continuation, if you will, of a discussion that we had, I think, both in December and January, December 2023, January 23, related to the taking the necessary steps to facilitate redevelopment of a portion of a section that the board owns in Gila County. And okay, and really what we're trying to do is set the stage for community housing development on this parcel of land. Locationally, it's right along I-70, and I'll come to that in just a second. Here, this is a better map. I think it's really fascinating. The parcel that's right here, it's almost the bullseye between the incorporated boundaries of Vale, Avon, Minturn, Eagle Vale. The blue represents the entire section. We're only looking at the little portion you can see here in red, and I'll zoom in on that. But I-70 runs east, west to east, right through the valley and right adjacent to this property. This is a view of the property looking above I-70, looking to the east. Generally, with what we're looking at is within this circle. It's a little hard to capture it all. The Eagle River runs along this corridor, this tree corridor. Part of the property that we're looking at is developed, and there are structures on ground basis in the state trust land, and part of it is at this point undeveloped. Again, another map showing I-70 coming through here. This is Highway 6. This is currently the limits, green is the limits of a right-of-way that the land board issued to CDOT in 1968. It's really the focus, the genesis, the starting point for this project. CDOT has two kinds of facilities on this green right-of-way. On the west side, they have maintenance facilities, barns, fuel storage, those kinds of things. They run their winter operation out of here to run plows on I-70 and the surrounding highways. On the east side, they have allowed CDOT employees over time to bring in essentially mobile homes. The structures themselves are owned by the employees. The land is under the right of way that CDOT controls. What we are looking to do, or what we're targeting first, is the removal of those residential structures to free up land for new development. And actually, this is probably a good place to mention this. Last legislative session, there was a bill passed, SB 01, which provided up to $2 million to fund the relocation of this employee housing, or to relocate these employees to other locations, whether that means taking the trailer and going somewhere, or buying the trailer from them so they can use those funds to secure housing somewhere else. So we're not displacing these important employees from the valley, only from this site. And we've been working with Patrice Bryant from the Governor's Office of Public-Private Partnerships closely on this whole thing. Again, in aerial view, you can see here, this is the CDOT maintenance facility. This is the CDOT employee, for lack of a better term, housing sites. And I'll wait for another. This is the Eagle River right to the north of all of that. This is Highway 6 to the south. I won't spend much time on this. Really, I think the highlight, this was a map that our consultants prepared, but it just sort of highlights with these circles, these circles from the center of the site are a quarter mile, a half mile, and a mile, and it just sort of highlights the proximity and central location of the site to other destinations and important facilities in the valley. So we developed a plan. So what I was here to talk to you about in December and January was you gave us some funding for planning and civil engineering primarily. And what's resulted from that, and I'll take you quickly through the entire plan. We didn't want to just look at what phase one might do without looking at what a 30-year vision for the entire property might be, because that's, I think, really the exciting opportunity. So I'm going to take you through it a phase at a time, but I'll start with phase one. So when we successfully relocate the phase one, the trailers to free up this phase one, it appears there's an opportunity for between 80 and 100 new employee, or what we're calling community housing units on the site. The governor has indicated his goal would be 80 units, so we're comfortably above his stated target. We still have a lot of work to do on this, but we're comfortable that we're in the right range for phase one. As when CDOT ultimately vacates the maintenance facility, there's an opportunity for a phase two. You can see that in combination, phase one and phase two, there's a large sort of public park space and a promenade along the river. Those have been important items from the standpoint of the community, that this doesn't become a private enclave, but it's really a brand new neighborhood it's like in Avon, and that it contributes to sort of the social fabric of the entire valley. We are looking at improvements along Highway 6. Ultimately, that includes a roundabout. And then this road will show up in the next slide, but we need to access ultimately the north side of the river. And I'm calling these phases 1 and 2. This is pretty logical to this point. After this, we have 7 or 8 more phases, which honestly could, depending on a number of circumstances, could be structured differently than they're shown here. But for purposes of discussion, we've said once you cross the river, there's an immediate phase 3. We have to cross both the river and the railroad tracks. We would then anticipate starting to develop to the east with a phase 4, a phase 5. At the point this was developed, we were thinking we would cross the railroad tracks again on the surface, which is really challenging to get that permission from the railroad, and then have another bridge across the Eagle River. And the thinking was we would need 2 ways of ingress and egress from this north side for emergency services. Further discussions have indicated that if we limit our development up on the north side to about 200 units and can get developed, which is possible for less money. There's an adjacent developer up here. I'll go back. Should have highlighted this. One of the things that sort of shows up here is there's a developer called Traer Creek adjacent to our north boundary here. They ultimately had plans to develop to the east and come across the river at some point. If we can combine our joint access across the river and leverage their surface roads to the east, we would eliminate the need for this second access point. Economically, from a pro forma standpoint, it's really advantageous for us to do that. We lose a little bit of development potentially here, but it's minimal. And so this probably, point I'm getting to is this probably never, or doesn't exist in any foreseeable future. We would access from this direction, have sort of a long loop road here, and have an access, an exit here and an exit in this direction. And then because we have ground leases on the existing state trust land, we were calling these phase 6, 7, and 8, because those ground leases are fairly long dated. They start to expire in the mid 2030s. But our intention is to annex everything that's shown on this map into the town of Avon, get zoning for all of it, and then do preliminary subdivision on all of it, and then offer through some means that we haven't yet determined, but offer this piece, which is phase 1, to the market on a ground lease for development of community housing. We can pause there. Any questions about the vision plan, if you will?
So Greg, is that impacted at all by flooding in?
The river, I'll show you an image in just a minute. The river is really deep in size. It's down,
And is there impact from there having been fuel there underground?
probably. I was just reading we got a phase 1 environmental report today on this piece. There are very few concerns. Actually, the concern that came up was, and we will have to do a phase 2, is that this whole site may be old mine tailings, but we don't know for sure from where or what they consist of. Yet the phase 1, even though it was only commissioned for this, looked at the surrounding area, and it certainly looks like we will have to do a thorough phase 2 on the CDOT maintenance facility, and probably, I suspect, I'm saying this without any specific knowledge, but I suspect there'll be a little bit of remediation required over there. There have been historic spills recorded. They have done monitoring wells. There don't appear to be plumes in the groundwater. I suspect we'll find them. We've done only cursory work to describe the character of the buildings, but it was helpful in our discussions with the stakeholder group that I'm going to talk about in a minute. That there will be some height, especially along Wheatfield, the highway, and perhaps along the railroad, and then lower density develop smaller types of units. So there'll be a range of unit types there. It's unlikely to be any single family. There may be some townhome kinds of things that are for sale. But a lot of it will be for rent. I imagine rental product at this point. So we developed this model which helps answer your question. This is looking again from the west end of the project to the east. You can see greater density here fronting the highway, some bigger buildings. We think that the overall density is going to be in the neighborhood of 25, maybe 30 units to the acre, but possibly lower here against the toe of the slope, sort of representation of the crossing. But you can see that the river is quite low in this area. The banks are probably 35, maybe 40 feet above the river. Again, this was looking at sort of that main park space, main public space and the river edge. Along Highway 6, again, we were interested in this because we do think there's an opportunity for higher buildings here, taller buildings. And then from the roundabout looking to the east. We've been working for 4 months now with a stakeholder group that includes all of the sort of adjacent local municipalities, the relevant metropolitan districts, Eagle Vale or Upper Eagle River Water Authority and the Sand District being critical. We do have to get water from somebody. They have water availability if the project is geared towards has certain requirements for affordability. We still have to work through that. Our total need is about 12 acre feet of consumptive water built out. So it's not a huge demand, but we still have to reach agreement with them to provide. The Trail Creek Metropolitan District is that adjacent landowner. So they've been at the table with us, and I mentioned Teresa's office listed at the bottom. It's been, I think, a really cooperative.
I've been in real estate development a long time, never been to a meeting like this where 15 people around the table all said, yes, how do we make it happen? It was pretty amazing. The amount of lean in from everybody.
And going in, one of the questions was, who wants us, if anybody, should we be in Avon, Vale, Minturn, should we stay in the county? And there appears to, I think we have consensus pretty quickly to the conclusion that they don't. The county doesn't think this kind of development belongs in the county. It should be in a municipality or municipal jurisdiction, and that Avon is really leaned in. They've really been helpful and encouraged us to apply for annexation. So that's the path we're on. So some key achievements. I think that when I sat here a few months ago, we had no idea what the site capacity was. It appears it's about 600 units with about 50,000 square feet of commercial space, community neighborhood oriented commercial space. We've got some sense of the infrastructure costs. They're not bad on the south side of the river. They get expensive on the north side particularly because of the crossings. But there's some ways to bring that down. It hasn't precluded anybody yet from saying we should keep going. We've got a general development concept that I've shown you that has been endorsed by the stakeholder group. Agreement to pursue annexation in the town of Avon. Identified potential water sources that we need to secure one. And we're now starting more specific discussions about how do you get a phase 1 development off the ground. The notion is we should be able to complete the annexation, zoning, and subdivision work over the next, say, 6 months. And the conversations that Teresa's office has been having with CDOT and with the other parties involved in the housing is that we would like to see them relocated by July 1st, July 31st of next year in that window. So in theory, we would have a site available for somebody to start doing physical work at that point in time. We'll see if we can hold to those deadlines, but that's loosely the schedule we're working with. So with the funds that you provided the last time around, we hired a land planner and a civil engineer. Now I need all these other people. I need a surveyor, geotechnical work, transportation studies, phase 2 environmental, legal services, which we're actually going to, we've identified a legal firm that we'd like to hire. They will be hired directly by the AG's office and funded through, see if I say this right, Ed, if I don't, paid for by the AG's office. And then as you do your look back and figure out which you'll charge us every year for legal services, they'll be
Basically, it'll be passed through.
okay. Thanks.
But it'll be passed through the land use legal budget, and there will be a lag time for that of probably a couple of years, the way the budgeting process happens. So a year or two from now, you will see an increase to your standard legal budget that will balance this out.
My strategy is simply to replace the AGs at that point. Let them eat that. No comment.
I'm not sure that it's worthy of one.
And I need an appraisal. So we've collected preliminary proposal, well, actually more than preliminary, we've collected proposals from all of those people. I wanted to remind you that to date, you've approved $250,000 worth of funding. We have spent the bulk of that. We do have about 75,000 remaining, and so that is, I've called it unused and still available. When I add that to the proposals I've received, I still need, with a little bit of cushion, another $415,000, which would bring the total funding approved to date, if you approve it, to $665,000. I would pause here to see if there's any sticker shock requests.
That's sticker shock, but what's the timing against? You kind of loosely outlined that of expenditure of these
I would
funds.
expect all of these funds, the majority to have been expended by the end of the first quarter of next year.
Okay,
So it's a pretty quick spend. It would be we would get started. It will take me, we sort of said to the town, because I think they wanted to know why we've paused a little bit, because I didn't want to continue spending unless we had your endorsement and of moving all the way forward. So I've been holding that $75,000. We will probably have the team up and running by August 1. So we'll have 4 months of work this year and sort of like 3 months of work next year. That's 7 months of,
okay.
If you wanted to give some context to the number, if you said there are 30 developable acres, to pick a round number, that's 50 cents a foot. The land is worth a lot more than that. And I think we're engaging in a role that we haven't typically as an organization. We're not going to be the vertical developer, I can tell you that. That's not our skill sets, not our risk profile. But I do think it makes a lot of sense to go entitle it at this point, because you really create value. If we're selling raw land, that's not worth much. If we're selling land that's in a town that is subdivided and has zoning and entitlements on it, that's worth a whole lot more to somebody. And so I think this is a really good investment of our dollars up there. And I think we will recover it in multitudes.
Yeah, two questions. One is on the budget, and then one I'm putting out there now so I don't forget it later is about the relocations, the residential relocations. So first, Bill knows what you just said is music to my ears. That's how I'm always thinking about these types of properties as well, is just taking down that risk to really enhance what the marketability overall will be. So I think definitely agree with the approach. The numbers that we're seeing here, I think, are definitely make sense. So definitely not sticker shock there. I think one, now I can't remember what that question was. Oh, with respect to this though, what is the plan for, will this be rolled into future ground lease, or how do you plan to kind of recoup this?
Ultimately, it would either be through the revenues we receive through ground leases or through sales. Bill and I have talked, and nothing is really certain at this point, but I think we certainly see phase one for a number of reasons on a ground lease. One way, conceptually, I could see everything on the south side of the river on a ground lease. As you get to the north side, it may make more sense to be looking at land sales, but it's so far in the future. I just don't know.
Mr. Mark, I'm going to echo that we're not really committed to anything. But to the extent that some of this wants to be for sale housing, that's really hard to do on a ground lease. So I wouldn't recommend it.
But yes,
I'm familiar with the land trust concept, as you know. I don't think that's our business model. So I could see us selling that ground to somebody else. We have taken a fairly hard line. I think we've had a couple of people say, will you sell phase one? And my thought has been to say, no, we want to be the ground lessor, because the bill that facilitated all this happening was public-private partnership. And I think for us to sort of dump and run and take the state out of the equation isn't really in the spirit of that. And so to the extent that we could do a project that's similar to what we did up the street here, where we're the ground lessor, a vertical developer comes in, builds the product. I think that really underscores what the governor's goals were and enables us politically to go back and ask for the money that will be required to move CDOT off of the other part. And that's going to be north of $20 million. We don't have that. These pro formas aren't going to support that. But somehow we got to get the funding to get them off. And I think that becomes a lot easier when the political community and the legislature and all can say, hey, we invested in phase one and it worked. Now we're going to put the money forward to phase two. So I've tried to hold pretty hard that we're going to be a ground lessor of phase one at least.
So
And then, sorry, I had one second question, which was just with respect, to the CDOT, the relocation. Will those folks will there be a prioritization or a right to return or into future housing that's here?
I think the question's been asked. Really, we are not part of, the Terese Bryant's office is directly responsible for reaching whatever agreement it is they choose to reach with those folks. So I don't want to speak for her. And
there are rules that surround that relocation. There's Colorado winds. So she's navigating all that stuff, and none of that money flows through us. That's all money going to CDOT, and the relocation is being handled by the 3 people.
those employees, I think.
Yeah, to the extent that they want to come back to this location and the new housing, I think that can be accommodated. We would need to work with the developer to say, hey, we're going to need there to be in whatever it is you propose to build, we're going to need, I'm making this up, 10 units at 30% AMI.
Yeah.
Or whatever that math is. And so build that into your pro forma, and then we'll have to figure out what the financing gap is and who we're going to go get that from. Or we could make it simpler and just say, hey, CDOT, if you want to master lease X number of units in here, you can. There is a way to accommodate it. How that happens right now is still uncertain.
8 CDOT employees living there now. And most of them, in previous conversations, we've been told they're not particularly interested in this kind of housing because they have snowmobiles and boats and lots of, in the current situation, they have a whole bunch of room for a whole bunch of stuff. But as Bill said, it can be done. I don't know what level of interest there may be.
And that's all, it's not, this is just the question, but it's that the overall stewardship of this, this is landlord's land on this or name on this, and what is that looking like, and what are we requiring to meet broader needs and goals in that neighborhood, in that area. So
I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, and I'm sure you find it interesting. I mean, the whole notion of community housing up there versus affordable housing in the city, that really is very different. They're saying we have a need across the spectrum. We have doctors in the hospital who need housing. We have teachers and firefighters who need housing. So
that's actually not different than it is here, but yeah.
Sort of, in some instances, that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in deed restrictions that say full-time resident, full-time employee.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see where
their vocabulary is, they don't like the word affordable, they like community housing.
Yeah.
We just need places for people to live regardless of how much money they make.
And I think we're all in that business, and we use the different terms, and that's fine. And understanding that's all is just where I will be uniquely interested in understanding how those types of things come out of this.
I think we have an ability to structure it however stakeholders want to see it structured.
That's going to flesh out as we negotiate the development with the town. So we'll know soon.
One of the challenges is going to be the immediate relocation of the CDOT, because you're not going to find housing for the sale of the.
Interestingly, I think they have a lead on something.
Do they? Okay.
Yes, because they came back and asked us for a specific date. Latrice came and said, if you can put off starting anything on site until July of 24. That gives me enough time to get them into this other project.
Okay, right?
So again, I don't want to get too deep into her business, but
Yeah.
She's got enough of a plan to ask us for a specific exit date.
Did you have another question?
Very good. And we'll be seeing this in September, it sounds like.
And we'll add marketplace to that tour at your request, Commissioner Clark.
Yep.
That's some really cool opportunity up
Oh,
here.
yeah. It's that much land is amazing.
Yeah.
It's very hard to come by.
Yeah, I don't think I said it. We think it appears it's about 40 acres of
Yeah,
developable or redevelopable.
Yeah.
In total.
that's great. And a huge community need. So we do have an IND request and we will need a motion.
So do we need any public comment on this?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry. We do. Are we done? We finished with commissioners. We'll open up to public comment.
Folks in the audience, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, use that raise hand feature. We'll give you a few seconds to click through.
And I plan to make a motion, but I just want to commend you on the community process. of
Yeah,
this and
it's great.
collaboration, because how you determine who's eligible for housing, I think community really needs a chance to weigh in. I like the idea of year-round residents. That concept makes it very appealing for.
Yeah,
use.
absolutely.
I move the approval of the Dow Junction Investment and Development Fund request in the amount of $415,000 as described in the board recommendation in our packet, and authorize the director to take appropriate action consistent with the board decision.
Second.
All right, and with no public comment,
And just for the record, no public comment.
we have a motion from Commissioner Heath and a second, Commissioner Clark. Let's call a quick vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
I believe you just said second, Commissioner Clark, it was second. Commissioner
Oh,
Frobe.
I'm sorry, second, Commissioner Frobe.
Hi.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. All right, exciting. Well,
4-0.
yep, 4-0. Forgot our.
Forward to seeing it.
I do too. I think it'll be great. All right, and we have the real Andy with us to do our board leasing agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Andy Bissett for the Transactions and Record Services team. We have a couple of changes to the board leasing agenda that's found in your packets this month. On item number 5, staff is requesting the removal of item number 5 due to a delayed step in the notification process. The expected outcome of this is that you will see this item appear in next month's board leasing agenda. Additionally, item number 11, staff is requesting the termination date be updated from July 15th to July 29th. With these proposed changes, there are 10 total items on the July board leasing agenda, 6 bids, 3 new leases, and 1 termination. Staff's available for any questions and recommends approval of the July board leasing agenda, not including item number 5, and with the revised date of July 29th on item number 11.
So noted, discussion with commissioners. I do not see any. Let's open it up to public comment.
Members of the public, now is the time to interact with the board on the board leasing agenda. So use that raise hand feature, and we've got a quick hand from Matthew Taylor. I'm going to bring him to the board to address the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, you've got control of your mic and camera, so when you're ready, feel free to.
Very good. Welcome, Mr. Taylor. We can see your screen.
Good morning, Commissioners. Matt Taylor here representing tenant Peak Microgreens. This is item number 11, the termination of the lease. Thank you for allowing me to participate today. Just wanted to say that my client is absolutely willing to sign the surrender agreement to vacate the premises by July 29th. The original intent was to vacate the premises this coming Saturday and move into a newly built location, but about 2 weeks ago, the developer hit some permitting issues that have pushed the move out date by 2 weeks. I think as you can see from the email we forwarded to Mr. Agler from the developer. But again, we are able to vacate the premises on the 29th, and again, we are willing to sign the surrender agreement to that effect.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate that. And we did see the email that you sent. Any further public comment, Nick?
I see no additional hands raised.
All right, I think then we are ready for a motion.
I move that we approve, that the board approve the board leasing agenda for July 2023 with the following revisions: deletion of item number 5 and changing the date on item 11 from July 15th to July 29th, and otherwise as presented in our packets.
Thank you. That was a motion. Commissioner Clark, do we have a second? Second, Commissioner Frobe. We will call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes, that passes 4-0. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes from our last meeting in June to offer? All right, with that, the minutes will pass by acclamation. There's 2 more things we want to talk about: board officer elections. And then I think we want to talk about the virtual meeting that we're having.
Yep.
Next month. So with that, we do board elections every year. And I was curious and asked Bill to do a little back research into what's an average term. You know, just not to set a policy, but kind of a norm that we can sort of support, reserving the right, of course, at any time during any election cycle for the board to take a different direction. But I really was just curious, like what's kind of been the norm. So
3 years has been kind of standard during my 12 years here. There's no rhyme or reason to that. It's just sort of worked out. If I look back, Commissioner Bloom, Commissioner Blessing, in general, they stayed as president.
Gary might have been 4.
Gary might have been 4.
But yeah.
And somebody else was 2. Bynum, I think, left in the middle of her term. Did not get
So
renewed
other
by the governor.
circumstances, but I was
Yeah.
just trying to get a feel for this, especially given when term limits kind of kicked in with boards and commissions. And I would advocate for that mostly because Bill and I have a lot of work to do this year. We really have some legislative goals that we would like to see realized. And that's just involving a lot of outreach and education and work that I like to partner with Bill on in doing. But I feel like that's kind of the right amount of time, candidly, having served in this role. It gives a chance for other commissioners also who, as our terms are staggered, to also take on leadership roles, which I really respect.
I'm in favor of at least 3 years, but I'm not in favor of limited.
That's okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we're not defining any.
Yeah,
We're just
no,
saying
it's
that
just
this would be
getting a
preferred.
pulse for it, because I actually did not know. I'm like, what do people usually do? I agree with that.
So do we need to?
We will need a motion for, I think the only 2 roles are mine and Josie's, correct?
So, president and vice president.
Yeah.
I'd like to move that we nominate Christine Spillane to continue as chair of the board of state member.
Second.
Go ahead. Thank you. I appreciate that. Should we do these separately or together?
We just did it separately. So.
Okay,
But yeah, you might as well keep.
keep going. We'll keep rolling with this. All right, let us call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes. I appreciate the endorsement and support. And I should note, the motions came from, I just forgot, Commissioner Heath and
second.
Clark, first and second for the record. Okay, let's, I would like to nominate Josie Heath to stay as vice chair.
I appreciate that. I do want to extend that offer to others. I think it's an opportunity for people to grow and learn about business of the board. And so if there's anyone else who'd be interested in doing it.
Appreciate it. Any comment?
Not at this time.
I think Philip was supportive of just where we are right now.
I appreciate you putting that out there. I think that's terrific.
Yes, I move that we retain Josie Heath as vice president of the board.
Perfect.
Second.
We have a motion, Commissioner Probe, and a second, Commissioner Clark. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Probe,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
and the chair votes yes. That motion passes 4-0. All right, we have made progress. So thank you all.
Thank you both.
In our August date,
Okay. Now, upcoming meeting notes for your planning. At the beginning of the year, Rachel always blocks out 2 days in your calendars. For August, actually, we have almost no business, kind of a strange workflow, but we'll need about an hour of time is all, and we should do it by Zoom. Nobody needs to drive here for that. You have blocked out Wednesday, the 9th and Thursday, the 10th in your calendars. We can do it whichever day and at whatever time you all would like. If you want to just do it Wednesday at 8:30 and get it over with, that's great. But if your schedules want something different, we can do that.
I would like to see it as early as possible. I'll be on Eastern time,
As early in the day.
Got it.
early in the day. Yeah, I think somewhat indiffererent on the days.
And I'm seeing that I actually do have a meeting on Thursday that I don't normally have. So if we could do it on Wednesday.
Wednesday's fine by me too.
You want to start at 8?
Sure.
I'm good either day.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's say Wednesday, August 9th at 8 o'clock.
Is that work for Bill? Paul?
I think so. I have no reason to believe it doesn't.
Because we would have already held it for the workshop.
Right.
Okay.
And Rachel just update our calendar invites. Okay. You are the best. All right.
In September, we've said we're going to travel up. That's the 13th and 14th. The 13th will be the workshop tour. I anticipate the day being focused on the Dow Junction parcel, but in connection with the discussion around affordable housing development, community housing development in mountain communities, I think it makes sense to stop in Summit County. There's an interesting example of a project up there in which I may have the facts a little bit wrong, but Vail Resorts was the owner of the land. A third-party developer came in and built the vertical. The county was also heavily involved and put money in. The county may end up owning one of the buildings. Vail Resorts, I think, owns a building. There's a third or fourth building. And we've asked the developer of that, who is Gorman, to give us a tour of the project and tell us about what the roles of the parties were, where the funding came from, how the phasing worked, how everybody played nice or didn't play nice. As the case may be. So we'll stop in Summit County on the way. We'll end up down in Avon at Dowd. We'll see that site. We'll see the marketplace site. We're going to talk to the town of Avon about explaining the process to us a little bit more. If there's time, we can. We have a couple of parcels that are close by, and we may also look and see if there's a best school nearby. So to be determined, but. The main point is count on both days, which will include an overnight in Avon.
The only suggestion with the Keystone property is maybe having someone from the county there.
Great.
They're very different perspectives. That I do know.
Great. If you'll connect me to the right person.
I am talking to them this afternoon,
Perfect.
so I'll find out who
I'll
is
add
the
them
right
in.
person. Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Yes.
I think we are adjourned then. Thank you all. Everyone driving up 70.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drive safely.
Traffic jam on 70.
Yeah.
Station.